Welcome to the Parent Matters podcast, where we equip moms, dads, and caregivers to connect and confidently parent their children. Parenting doesn't come with a how-to manual, so we're here to help you navigate the ever-changing landscape of parenting. I'm your host, Susan Stutzman, a licensed clinical professional counselor, child therapist, early childhood development educator, and owner of Kid Matters Counseling. Today is the first in a multi-part series on supporting a child with an ADHD diagnosis. Today, we're focusing specifically on the cultivating of healthy relationships at home. And to help me do that is a child therapist who works here at Kid Matters Counseling, Jon Caes.
Hello.
Hi, welcome to the show. Jon, I know, we know this, but I want to just share for our audience and those who are listening that you're a licensed clinical social worker here in Illinois, and you're a child therapist with a lot of experience. And there's so much that you could share with us. But just tell us a little bit before we jump into how to cultivate healthy relationships at home with an ADHD child. Tell us a little bit about your experience and what drew you to the field of social work and how you have worked for many years with kiddos, specifically helping kids and families navigate the challenges of an ADHD diagnosis.
Thanks, Susan. I've always worked with kids. And my parents brought me up to believe that helping other people was the best thing you could do with yourself. And it's a gift that gives back. So that's what I've been doing with my life. And I've been privileged to work with families and kids my entire life as a social worker in clinical mental health setting, in schools, in hospitals, and even in foster care and adoptions. And it's not just the experience, it's also, I think, trial and error. Seeing how different interventions and strategies impact a child and what the result is. Every child with ADHD is different. And what may work with one may not work with another.
Yeah, that is so true. Oh, well, I'm excited to talk about this with you today. I know you have some areas of focus that you would like to talk about that in your mind bring about really key ways to help children with ADHD navigate the relational skills and work at home. So why don't you just start us off?
Right. Well, one of the most important things is communication. And of course, some of the hallmarks of ADHD in kids is that they're very distracted and they can be ultra focused on especially preferred activities like gaming. And for instance, you may be wanting to stop the game. They need to get off. Maybe it's get ready for supper. Maybe it's time to leave for school or some other activity. And these can be the little moments that build up to a very frustrating household.
Yes.
Getting them to comply with those transitions.
So how do you help them comply? Through good communication skills? Like, what would you say are those good communication skills?
So the first thing you want to do is make sure that they're hearing you when you talk to them. And to do that, establishing eye contact. Make sure that they're not looking at the screen, that they're looking at your eyes. Keep it very simple and clear. Make a one-step direction. Don't do 2 or 3. And to ensure that they understand what you've asked, have them repeat it to you.
Yeah. No, I think that's really key, even for communicating with kiddos that don't have an ADHD diagnosis. But specifically, I love what you said. I try and do this at home with my kids too. Make sure that they see me so that I know that they can hear me. Because even though I'm talking, we don't always hear all different types of things. And especially when you have so much input and it's hard to decipher what to listen to when you have distractibility, such as with an ADHD diagnosis.
Absolutely.
It's sometimes a child they hear, but they don't hear.
Yeah, I think the field of neuroscience teaches us that where the eyes are looking, the brain is thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't have that eye contact, that direct gaze, you're missing a big part of their attention.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I know it helps to structure things. You mentioned that another component of helping nurture these relationships or cultivate these relationships with health at home is a key component that you mentioned to me prior to talking on air was structure. And I wonder if communication and structure kind of go hand in hand.
Yes, absolutely. To make a generalization, kids with ADHD need even more structure than others.
Why is that?
They may have a hard time recalling, or their impulses sometimes override what really is going to happen because they want to do things very strongly in the moment.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's so disappointing they can't give it up. But by having a regular, predictable, daily structure where things happen at the same time, they grow accustomed and are more successful with getting through all the daily routines that are important to be productive and successful.
Yeah, so like in my home, one of the things that I find myself doing for my kids is to create a calendar so that they know, okay, on Mondays we do this, on Tuesdays we do this, so it's repeatable.
Right.
And it's familiar, and it helps them to kind of get into a routine. And even if we have surprises or new things, that is not going to jolt them too much. It's going to be a change, but they know, okay, but then we go back to this. Or if something changes, it doesn't mean that Tuesday is going to be different, even if Monday was different.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent tool to use, Susan. And having strong visuals really locks in some events and makes them more present for the child's attention. And having the child even participate in developing that visual schedule, or sometimes giving them control to the extent possible over, hey, we're going to give you 90 minutes on your game. We could divide it up here and here. Here's some options, and let them decide. And generally, kids that have more ownership over the development of that schedule are going to also be more cooperative than with adhering to it. So having clear expectations about what the child is responsible for in a day, in addition to the fun things that they can plan and have choice over, and intermingling them in a schedule where the parent and the child are working together as a team, can be very powerful in gaining motivation to do things and cooperation.
I like that. Yeah, I think that that's really helpful. And as you were thinking, or as you were speaking that, I was thinking about specifically how structure doesn't mean that it's always scheduled to the moment, but that this is what we're doing during the day. But like you can split up your gaming time, or you can have it all in one chunk, right? So there can be choices within the structure. It doesn't mean that they don't have choices, but that there is a predictability about what's going to happen in life, and so that you can communicate clearly and kids know what's expected and what the expectation is.
Sure.
So when a kid doesn't do that, let's talk about discipline.
Yes, that's a big topic.
It's a very big topic, and perhaps we may do another whole segment just on discipline. But
there's a lot of material.
When I think of the word discipline now, after having been educated as an adult, I really think of like a training or a teaching versus a punishment. And I'm curious what you have to say about how to help children and provide discipline even when it may be challenging.
Sure.
Because do we discipline Or is it that they're just impulsive and they can't control it? And so it's not that they're being naughty, it's just who they are. Tell us a little bit about how you navigate this, what your thoughts are.
Absolutely. So first of all, I love that you framed it in a very positive way, because discipline does mean teach in the Greek root. And so how best can we teach kids? And starting by the positive. So kids need abundant praise and recognition for when they do things well.
Mm-hmm.
And so by having clear expectations and noticing, and we all know about the phrase catching them be good.
Yeah, catching them being good.
Right, is very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And the kids will want to emulate or repeat that experience of both getting positive recognition, feeling the pride also about having done something well.
Mm-hmm.
And then that gives them more confidence to know that they can get their needs met through adhering to those expectations too. So the positive approach is very important.
I find as a parent myself that catching my children being good or praising them or finding the good is really a way to cultivate in them increased wanted behavior. Mm-hmm. So I know sometimes before I became a parent, I was always like, is that real? Is that spoiling, or is that too much, or is there too much that you can say about, making your child feel like they're the best? But as I've journeyed through parenthood and am still journeying, and you too, I'm curious if you would agree with me that oftentimes is a curb for bad behavior or negative behavior or some behaviors that we don't want in our home because we don't value them.
Right. So often discipline is thought of as consequences. Usually we think of consequences as negative, but what you're describing is a positive consequence. Mm-hmm. And so that reinforces what you're looking for and does create a curve for positive behavior, like you're saying.
Yeah. But I know that children aren't always at their best, and it is really important too that parents cultivate and teach what is expected, and also provide consequences for
let's talk a little bit behavior. About that.
Yeah.
So first of all, there's no denying that kids with ADHD are extremely challenging.
Yes, that is true.
They need more prompts and reminders because they struggle with sustained attention, with adhering to a task, with following through, with organization, all of the things that make things operate at school or at home successfully. So let's think about all the messages that they cumulatively receive in a day. Mm-hmm. And it can be overwhelming, the amount of negative feedback that they could be receiving. They're not on time, they're being nagged, get this done.
You forgot your homework. Yeah.
Exactly, reminding things that they forgot about.
Stop shaking your leg, all those things.
Absolutely. So it's important that we prioritize a little bit about the main things. We might have to let go of some things. For example, I talked with a parent last week, and this has actually come up more than once, where I can't get them to wear long pants. They want to wear shorts in the winter. Now, you could have a big power struggle over that, but at the end of the day, is that the thing to die on? Or is it something bigger?
So let's talk about discipline and the ways in which you can do that in a positive way and still create clear and concise communication in a home. Tell us a little bit about what you think of discipline and how you share with parents the way in which to help a child through discipline.
Right. And so, again, when we think of discipline, we're trying to teach the child. So two powerful ways, and especially as we weave in consequences, are one, you have to be developmentally appropriate. So telling a child that, tonight they won't get a snack if they don't get ready for school on time is not going to be very powerful because it's so far in the future. Whereas something more immediate is going to garner more attention.
So kind of like a cause and effect, or something has to be tied to the situation
Absolutely.
for it to be more effective.
So timeliness is important. In addition, the more logical, as you brought up, that the consequence has to the behavior, the more meaningful it will be. Now, the most powerful consequences are called natural consequences. And those are a thing that we don't do anything about as a parent. If you don't take care of your toys, if you don't put them away, they could get lost. And then you can't find them. Whose responsibility is that? You didn't hide them. Your child, if it was important to them, they will figure out through trial and error that, wow, when I put them away in that box, I can find them the next day. And so that's very powerful.
Yeah.
If you leave your bike out on the front lawn and it gets stolen.
Yes, that happened. My child this summer, they were playing with scooters and they left it at the neighbors, and we're not exactly sure what happened. If it was the neighbor had returned it and it was on the edge of the curb, for the kids. That's normally where we put neighborhood paraphernalia, I want to say, because there's so many different types of things, ride-on toys, right? Or even bikes.
Sure.
And we couldn't find it, and it was gone, right?
Yeah.
And it was a natural consequence, and it was really sad because my other two kids hadn't lost their scooter, and so one of my children was scooterless, right? And we had a really powerful conversation about how it's so hard when things like that happen. It wasn't intentional. We don't know where it went, but it was taken. And so it's how important it is to be able to show your children through allowing natural consequences instead of just going out and actually rectifying every time the problem or the issue, right?
I think what you're talking about, Susan, is that parents can sometimes get in the way of learning that valuable lesson because we tap into that sadness that they feel about having lost that item, and maybe in the middle of the night we replace it or we put it back in the right thing. Yeah. And how can they learn that?
Yeah. And it's not, and I would argue it's not bad as a parent to want to do that, right? To love your children, to be like, I don't want them to experience pain, or I don't want them to experience the fear of thinking that someone's going to steal or take your stuff if, at any time. But there's also a flip side to that too, right? Of being careful not to overprotect your children so that they never experience the sadness or natural consequences, right? Because then when you're trying to work and cultivate healthy relationships at home, there may be unrealistic expectations that nothing ever gets lost, or that mom always is cleaning up, or dad, makes sure that nothing ever gets lost or stolen or broken or those types of things.
Think about your youngest having a bowl of cereal at the table and it spills onto the floor. Now, it's a whole lot easier if you clean it up. It's efficient. You're not going to make a bigger mess. But by having him participate in cleaning it up together, he learns there's a cause and an effect, and there's something that he has to do to restore things back to the way they should be.
Yeah, and it involves them, and it helps them to also cultivate a healthy relationship with cause and effect, right?
Exactly.
Because if you hurt your friend's feelings, you can't just, ignore it, right? Or you'll lose the friendship, or something else will happen, right? So teaching them, okay, so if you do this, this might happen. How can we rectify it, or how can we work with it and cultivate healthy relationships?
Yeah, so these are the building blocks of establishing responsibility, too.
Yeah, and I know sometimes in my mind, initially the word punishment kind of can feel simultaneous with discipline, but I love how you've talked about this and spun just a little bit more hope, even in my mind, of, oh yes, discipline can be teaching. It can be brought about by natural consequences. It can be logical. It doesn't have to be just like a punishment, or a very hard and fast. Even if it's structured, it doesn't have to look like maybe something that isn't healthy that we've grown up with, or saw, or have decided to change.
Yeah. With the older child, where they're more capable of abstract thinking, sometimes you run out of ideas about, like, what's a logical consequence for doing some of the things that kids do. And so then that's where punishment, or maybe something that's not exactly tied exactly to that incident occurs, like removing their phone or something like that. But again, you can still be creative, and if they haven't responded or been responsible with coming in on time, then maybe phone, you could argue, is connected, because you were looking at your phone and you didn't use it as the tool that it should have been to get you where you needed to be. So sometimes you can have to be creative and stretch things a little bit.
Yeah, and also, another thing that I'm thinking of is just how do we teach those skills and discipline, or cultivate a positive and healthy discipline in our child, while also helping them cultivate positive self-esteem, so that we're not pulling them down.
Sure. Oh, that's absolutely essential. And so, again, with ADHD kids, there can be so much angst and drama and repeating rules and discipline scenarios throughout the day, that it's important to maintain a nurturing, direct, one-on-one attention daily with your child, to make sure that this is in place, by having a nurturing time together that's predictable for the child and for the parent. It can restore and heal, some of the insults to the relationship that occur over the day. It's important to have strong boundaries around the care and relationship of your child from all the disciplinary scenarios that might have superseded this time or gone before.
Yeah. Because relationships are multifaceted, and there's so many components, and it can be really tricky if your child struggles with self-esteem, to think, if I discipline them, will I crush their spirit? If I'm structuring things, is that going to cause irreversible damage or pain or trauma or something? And I really like what you're saying about self-esteem and these connections each day. I know in my own world, one of the things that I find that can be really healthy, even if you don't have 20 minutes, 30 minutes, however, a big chunk of time, even like the moments of, there can be moments of meeting where I have engagement with my child, and we're actually looking at each other, right? In those structured communication times, and I'm smiling, I'm noticing them instead of trying to multitask and have a conversation with them while I'm preparing dinner or I'm on my phone. When I leave and when I come back to the house, making sure that I say hello, giving them a kiss or a hug, both times can be a really helpful way to meet and to have these healthy interactions, even if they're small or short, right? But then they're also structured and they're predictable and they're consistent. And it gives them a sense of mom sees me, I'm worthy, I'm loved, even if she has to discipline me or even if there are consequences that I don't like.
Right. And I think that's an important reminder, Susan, because especially during these times with COVID and social distancing and quarantining, where the family's all together all the time, it's sort of counterintuitive, but a lot of times we're not getting that quality time because everyone's all together and you think, oh yeah, we've been together all day. We don't need to carve out any extra time. But if you were to analyze it, sometimes there hasn't been that nurturing, calm, connective time that you can spend with your child.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Okay, before we go, I want to talk a little bit lastly about parent and their own needs as a parent of an ADHD child. But first, we're going to take a sponsor break. So today's podcast is sponsored by the 5-Day Parenting Challenge. It's a free 5-day challenge to help you make meaningful connections with your kiddos in 5 minutes or less. Just go to kidmatterscounseling.com/challenge to sign up. Okay, so Jon, we've talked about areas of focus in cultivating healthy relationships with kids with that ADHD diagnosis, specifically at home. And we've talked about healthy communication styles, so simple one-step commands with eye contact that's repeatable. We've talked about structure and keeping consistent structure in the home, having something easy to follow and easy to replicate. We've talked about discipline. We've talked about a lot about discipline, about how that looks like teaching and it being easy to trying to have it so that it's easy to follow and easy to replicate, but that builds positive reinforcement, right? So those are all tied together. And then also, how do we help with logical consequences and natural consequences and the building of self-esteem? And those have been so enlightening, but here's a big question.
Oh, yeah.
I'm a parent, right? You're a parent. How do we keep our cup full or filled enough to be able to keep doing this with our children, to focus, to help cultivate these healthy relationships when we are dealing with so much or we might feel spent? Tell me about parent support.
Yes, not only do you feel spent, but sometimes you might not like what you see in the mirror. You feel like, I'm such a nag, or am I a terrible person? I raise my voice, or I keep nagging. I found myself saying this. I can't believe it.
Yeah, like I know the right things to do, but I'm spent. I can't get it out.
Right, but the degree of difficulty with parenting a child with ADHD can be so high, it puts incredible stress on us.
Yeah.
And our skills and our relationship and our way that we think about ourselves. So this is a normative reaction to have. And so I think what you're inferring is, yes, we need to be very kind and mindful of ourselves. And we need to have other ways that we support ourselves.
So tell me just a few that you would recommend. What are some things that parents can do to support themselves?
Well, just as we talked about structure for the kids, you need a structure where you can rely on, knowing when the next time you have available that you're going to be seeing a friend or talking with someone or being able to read a book or go for a walk or for a run or a bike ride or just have some alone time is essential because otherwise hopelessness can creep in and then your whole mindset is going to get more negative and toxic. So obviously there's some mindfulness kinds of exercises that I think you had another podcast about, and other strategies that can help in the moment reduce stress, but also having some activities that you haven't given up just because you're in a challenging place as a family and as a parent is important.
Yeah, and I just want to add too that I love that you're mentioning this and having something to anticipate or the structure of knowing. I know for myself, I work full time, but I'm also at home, and I don't have to go into the office every single day. And that's really nice, but it also can be really challenging too, because there will be moments where I'm structuring for my children. They're in school and I'm doing work, and then they're home and I'm with them. And the day can stretch on forever on those days that I may need to be at home the entire day versus at my place of work. And so I've found like having a 4:00 tea time or a 5:00 dinner date with my husband, or even if I just have a babysitter come for 2 hours and we get takeout and eat it, in the car, there's something about actually getting out and taking a breath, right? Versus, okay, when the kids go to bed, I'm going to binge for an hour on Netflix. Like that. And I'm not saying that that's wrong at all, because I do that too. But sometimes having something tangible where you can be in relationship, like you mentioned, having coffee with a friend or going on a walk, it can be a really powerful way to promote self-care and parental support.
Right. And another thing that's real important is to be very realistic about your time and not set goals that are way too ambitious for yourself.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like decorating the house and parenting young kids and having a job.
Yes. And making cookies and bringing them to the neighbors and caroling. Yeah.
So you have young kids.
I do. And one of the things that helps me is, and I don't do this often enough, but I will say one of the things that I constantly am thinking about is building in margin. Because I think that that's where we as parents can get a real short fuse. And then we also expect from our children, to be on time, that we're on time, that everything, bam, 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 it has to be just the way. But there might be a train, and then it'll make us late. Or, like you mentioned, like the cereal might spill, right? And so if we have the time, then we can cultivate healthy communication and healthy discipline, right? Teaching them, okay, a natural consequence versus like, well, we'll deal with this later and you're going to lose your snack tonight, because there's no time for 8 hours to discipline them. Right.
And you become very stressed once you set a schedule or an agenda for yourself, because I'm behind.
Yeah, and so then, leaving spaces for time or margin are really helpful. And then you don't have good. And then you can have more of what you want in those marginous times.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Awesome. Well, that's my New Year's resolution. Build in more margin. Well, Jon, tell me, how can people get in touch with you, or any resources that you might recommend?
Sure.
About this topic, if people have more questions.
Absolutely. So CHADD, CHADD, is an excellent national organization with resources about ADHD. In addition, on their website, chadd.com, There's a link, and you can find support groups in your local area.
Yeah, that's really essential. I feel like having other parents that have walked this journey, they may not understand fully what you're going through, but they can be a support and a listening ear because they have had similar experiences. I know we also have on our website an ADHD page with some resources as well, with links to other places like Chad as well. But yeah, I really love that Chad has those not only parental supports, but also ability to find support groups in anyone's area. So wherever you're listening, check that out, chadd.com. Well, Jon, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an enlightening conversation, and I've gleaned so much from you, and I know our listeners will as well when they get to hear this. So thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today.
Thank you, Susan.
All right, folks. Well, thanks for listening. And if you found this conversation useful, subscribe to the podcast, and please join me next time for the Parent Matters podcast. And remember, don't parent alone.